You are listening to the One Day at a Time podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. Hey friend, thank you for joining me today. In case we haven't met yet, my name is Arlina and I'll be your host. Today, I'm speaking with Randy Hall, the former president of Dharma Recovery. He shares so much insight and wisdom on addiction recovery. And I have to say, I enjoyed this conversation so much. Randy is a guy who just really gets it. I loved his open-mindedness, his depth of knowledge, and his appreciation for all paths of recovery. Some of the things that we cover are around the add-on approach, the importance of rituals, replacing habits, healing practices, and so much more. This is a long one, so if you can't listen to this in one setting, I would highly encourage you to break it up into bite-sized pieces because the end includes some really important resources for other programs that you might like to explore. I'm actually going to explore some as well. So if you would like to connect with Randy, you can find all his information in the show notes at odatchat.com. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode. And as always, let me know what you think. Well, Randy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. I was just telling you before we hit record that I had been meaning to interview somebody from Recovery Dharma for ages. And just like out of the blue, our mutual friend Ashley was like, hey, you need to meet Randy. He's from, he knows a lot about Recovery Dharma. And I was like, hot damn. It was very serendipitous for me. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love to have the opportunity to talk about multiple pathways of recovery because I think for different folks, there's different strokes. So it's good to have information and resources out there that can resonate with different types of people.
100%. Like everybody knows that I'm a 12-step fan, but I've never only done one thing. I always did. I'm sort of greedy that way. I always did. It was sort of like the drugs and alcohol. Like I never did just one thing.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I like to combine different things, take what it works for me and leave the rest type deal.
Yeah, that's all.
So I find that a lot of these programs complement each other really well. You just have to be open-minded and curious and interested in trying new things,
You know what's funny about you say open-minded? I think most people want to believe that they are open-minded, but if you're not willing to give something a try, how do you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was telling my friend last night, like the 6 most dangerous words that I can say out loud are "that's just the way I am." Because if I've made up my mind about something, my mentor says the problem with my beliefs is that I believe them, and I don't question them. And I operate out of this default programming that maybe when I was younger served a purpose and was helpful to me, but over time became harmful to me. So I love going into new spaces and trying different things because it kind of challenges my preconceived beliefs about the way things should be. Which again, when I hear that word should, that's also like a red flag word where it's like, uh-oh, I have an expectation here. And that's just a resentment, waiting to happen. So
beautifully said. Beautiful. I just love that. I just was on this call this morning where they were talking about how to question your assumptions.
Yeah.
And it was done in a group setting, but that was like a process of sort of discovering what your limiting beliefs are. And the other people, you sort of like went through this little process in a group of 4, and people would be asking you questions. You state your problem, and they go, "Oh, I hear an assumption. And what would it be like if, and then they would pose these questions that really kind of deconstruct the assumptions. I was like, oh, that is genius.
Well, that's beautiful. And that's exactly what we do in Smart Recovery. I'm also a Smart Recovery facilitator. And that's really, and I'll talk about that a little later on. Like that's a big part of the program is sitting in the circle and kind of allowing other people to dispute the things that I believe, because sometimes like a horse with blinders, like I just can't see, if there's something on my face, it's so close to me, but I can't see it, and others can see it and they can assist me and point it out. So that sounds like a really interesting call y'all had.
Yeah, it was really cool. It sounds like the spinach in the teeth thing. Like, it's like, do you have a friend who will tell you you got spinach
Right.
in your teeth? You know what I've been
Absolutely.
obsessed with lately is this idea that you can't read the label from inside the jar.
Oh,
And like
okay.
when you're kind of sitting in a problem, it's like you can't see it, but your friends can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always think of like the image of a snow globe, because that really resonates with me. And when I am mentally and emotionally agitated, it's like all of the glitter and confetti are just like swirling around me and I cannot see through it. And only through being still and taking that sacred pause and allowing everything to settle can I then have any opportunity to like make the best decision in the present moment. So yeah, I really I enjoy the idea of just of allowing others, self-disclosing what's going on with me and then receiving feedback and then taking the feedback, hopefully. That can sometimes be the most difficult part, of course. But yeah, I couldn't do it alone. I don't know anyone who's ever done it alone with any amount of ease. I know people who've gotten sober and stayed sober for a long time by themselves, but that's not really what I'm looking for. That's a symptom of a larger problem to me. What I want is a life of harmony and ease, and
Yeah.
doing it with community just seems like why wouldn't you? So.
You know what I learned is that extreme independence is a trauma response.
Mhm.
And that if you were little and people didn't respond to your needs, not just your wants, but your needs, you begin to, withdraw and go inward and become extremely self-reliant and to a fault. And I'm with you. It's like, pain shared is lessened, joy shared is expanded. It's like, why wouldn't you? Like, if you feel safe, if you can find a safe way, safe people,
Right.
why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Well, let me ask you I like to do this thing called the lightning round, just to sort of front load the episode with some resources because I'm an obsessive learner. I was telling you earlier, I started a second podcast called Self Help Junkie because I just love that dopamine hit of like a new insight, a new piece of wisdom. But when you first got sober, or maybe even before that, when you started on this journey of recovery, were there any books that really spoke to you in the beginning?
Well, the first book that I ever read about addiction, and this was years before I actually was ready, willing, and able to change and heal my life, was a book called Positive Addiction by William Glasser. And it
Ooh.
posited basically that people who deal with substance use disorder typically behave in impulsive and compulsive ways, and that there's not going to really be like some magical remedy that like prevents that from happening. So instead, learning to channel that impulsive and compulsive behavior into healthy activities, and that kind of depends on the unique individual. For some, it's running. For others, it's going to meetings and being of service. It certainly is for me, right? Like, can I get addicted to hot yoga? Can I get addicted to cultivating a recovery community like I have in Birmingham? So, like, to the extent that I can impulsively and compulsively do those things, as opposed to self-destructing, harming myself by ingesting substances. Um, so that book actually kind of helped me a little bit. Then really like in going to treatment and for the first time doing a deep dive into the root causes of my suffering, which were leading to, this pattern of self-abuse. And by going to inpatient treatment, and that's what I did. I needed inpatient treatment. I tried outpatient treatment, but I just kept drinking and using. And finally, my mentor recommended that I undergo what he called the werewolf treatment. If you've ever seen the horror movie, when the guy's going to turn into a werewolf, they like chain him to a rock. So when the moon comes out, he can't like go around and hurt others and himself. So that's what I did. I went to inpatient treatment for 40 days. And while I was there, I was given the big book, I was given Refuge Recovery, I was given the Smart Recovery Handbook. And those three books really formed the basis, I think, for my recovery journey. Later on, the Recovery Dharma book came, which now I would say is like my primary program and the book that kind of best describes like how I try to ethically like exist in the world. But at first, it was really all three of those books kind of coming together and seeing the way that all three of the books described the same thing. It was all the same tea in different cups, you know? It was based on community. It was based on self-reflective practices. It was based on working with others in a reciprocal way, being helped by others and helping others. And, you know, you can call different things, you know, one program might call it a higher power, another program might call it the Buddha Dharma Sangha or whatever, but they're all talking about the same thing at the end of the day, which is like, how do I suffer less? Like, how do I go out into the world and cause less harm to myself and others? How do I cultivate a life that I don't want to escape from? You know, a life that is so joyous on occasion that to ingest a substance would like take me out of it and that would repulse me, you know? And honestly, you know, AA has its promises, Recovery Dharma has its practices, and they're all describing the same thing. And it's really just a matter of like what resonates with the individual. You know, they go into the space. How does it make you feel in your body, in your mind, in your spirit? And I found healing in all of those rooms. So I'm kind of like a big proponent again of just like, let's try as many of these things as possible and see what we like. And then over time, let's adapt and evolve, because like what worked for me when I was 6 months sober might not work for me when I'm 6 years sober, right? So I'm
Amen.
constantly like you, it sounds like I'm reading new books. I want to understand uh, the physiological nature of addiction, the neural pathways, dopamine. I want to understand psychologically, like how does the mental fixation take hold? How can I interrupt those stories when they start to run on loop in my head and kind of drive that craving and obsession? I want to understand emotionally how to soothe myself, how to take care of myself in a compassionate way instead of slapping the wrist or again trying to escape my feelings, which is kind of a fruitless, you know, there is no escape from the feelings. They're going to happen whether I sedate myself or not. And then, yeah, spiritually as well. And some people sleep on the spiritual element of it, but I think that that's really where everything kind of comes together. And people who go to smart recovery, they might not need that, right? That's a very rational based approach with no real spiritual element to it. But again, you have the community, the self-reflective practices, the reciprocity with others. And to me, that's how the healing happens, you know?
Yeah, I like that you're recovery promiscuous, if you will.
I get around. I haven't tried Celebrate Recovery, but whenever a new program comes out, I want to see what they're doing. I'm like, what are these people
Yeah.
doing? Like, it's very exciting to me that people are out there. And you know, most of them are based on the 12 steps. That most of them take the best elements of it. And maybe they call it something different. You know, in Recovery Dharma, we call it a mentor instead of a sponsor, but it's a very similar type of relationship. And that's a beautiful thing and a testament to like the prescience and wisdom of the people, you know, 90 years ago or whatever it was. Like they were kind of like radically before their time, I feel like, in their ability
Mhm.
to create a community that is free. You don't have to pay to go to, and you can receive this mutual support from peers with lived experience. You know, what a beautiful thing that they created.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. When I got sober 30 years ago, there was nothing else available in terms of like addiction recovery program. So I'm glad that I got that experience, and I really love how people are just adapting. Like it's a take what you like, leave the rest kind of a deal. And I like that people are adding on to it in ways that make sense with new information. And listen, yeah, I love how you're able to pull in all the similarities of all these different programs. I just feel like we need to meet people where they're at. And if you just can't get past your limiting belief or your internal resistance or your history or your story, that's okay, right? The goal, like you were saying, is to reduce suffering for yourself and others, build that connection, follow your purpose and or find one. even. But very well said. You're very articulate. It's almost like you've done this before.
I've done it a few times, but I also recognize that you said this was the lightning round, and I gave like a 5 minute answer to a very simple question. So I do have a
Well,
tendency. I have a tendency to like I get excited and I kind of like
same,
spin and
same.
but
And I will not
often
rein you in.
okay.
I will not rein. You
Oh, look
go, you
out!
go.
Yeah, look out!
Yeah, but let the spirit move you, and whatever needs to come out is going to come out. Did I call it the lightning round? I really need to. I really need to change that because it's never lightning fast or anything. I joke around that I should call this the turtle round, but that doesn't seem right either. That's not as catchy.
No.
What is your self-care practice look like? I would imagine it might incorporate things like meditation. You talked about doing some hot yoga. Do you do it like do you have a daily routine, a weekly routine, or what does that look like?
Definitely. I find that structure and ritual is really important in recovery. Many of us, we used ritualistically. Like the way that I used drugs and alcohol was like a daily ritual where, and I
Yeah.
won't get into it because it can be triggering
Oh,
for
I was just
something.
about to.
Well,
No,
like
no.
yeah, I feel some sort of agitation and I like immediately go to my walk-in closet and in my walk-in closet I would have a jacket and in each of the different pockets of the jacket I would have like a different substance depending on, what
Oh,
I was
you're like a
what I was
magician.
yeah. Well, I was really like a chemist and I
A
thought that
chemist.
I could control my human experience, right? Through I need to calm down and sleep. So I'll take a little bit of this, or I want to be more euphoric and I want to go to the party and be the life of the party. So I'll take a little bit of this, and always trying to like control how I
Yeah.
felt. So because humans like we develop these habits and these loops, and it becomes
Yeah.
very difficult to extricate ourselves. It's important to replace those habits with new healthy habits in recovery because you're going to have a lot more time because how much time did we spend procuring and using and recovering from the use? Like a lot of time. Now we have all of this time. So, yeah, every morning when I wake up, the first thing that I will typically do is I will do a brief meditation and I have an intention setting practice that I do. And the first intention that I set is that today I will not ingest a mood altering substance at any time for any reason, no matter what. That's like the first thing I say. And my mentor calls it the sobriety priority because if that goes wrong, everything else that I want to do is going to suffer, right? If I can't stay
Mhm.
sober, I'm not going to be able to show up for myself and others in any way. So, and it has to be unconditional at any time for any reason, no matter what. Because if I give myself an out, if I say, well, unless I get fired from my job or unless my relationship ends or, then I'll manifest those things, right? If I give myself an out. My mentor always says, like, even if a comet was hurtling towards Earth, and it was going to hit the earth in 30 minutes like he would not use because if he said that he would he'd be in his backyard with a telescope like looking for the comet, right? Like, oh,
Yeah,
I think I
yeah.
see it. So it's unconditional and then I just go through these like it's basically like a mantra practice where I say, today I want to be present, I want to be at peace, I want to trust the process, I want to accept myself, I want to accept others, I want to accept that everything is constantly changing in ways that I can't control and that I don't know what's best necessarily for myself or for others. So instead of ruminating on the past or fixating on the future, can I just focus on my breath and focus on my purpose, focus on helping my friends and family and myself with the understanding that while I'm trying to stay connected and I'm trying to do the next right thing, I'm going to frequently mess up. And when I do, can I give myself some compassion and remember that no matter what happens today, I'm worthy of love and acceptance. And then throughout the day, I feel like having set those intentions in the morning, like those neural pathways that we were just talking about, like I will act in more accordance and alignment with those intentions. And it's important that I do that multiple times a day because everything that I just said is like counter programming for the beliefs that I used to have about the world. Um, So yeah, meditation is a huge part of my practice. Doing hot yoga and rock climbing are also really important. Like by moving the body physically, I think is very important for me mentally and emotionally. And then, yeah, I work with a lot of people in recovery. I mentor a lot of people. I am mentored by a lot of people, and I go to a lot of meetings and I facilitate a lot of meetings and I lead meditations and do the topics and stuff. Because again, I find in that reciprocity, like that's to me how the healing happens, that moment of compassion where I'm telling you about my experience and you are just accepting me non-judgmentally, and I can see it in like the pressure behind your eyes that you're listening to me and that you understand and that you have compassion for me, and then that makes it okay for me to have it for myself. In early recovery, like I'm not capable of giving myself that love and acceptance, and I think that's why the rooms are so important, to have these other people. So I show up, and I've been showing up, 4 times a week probably. Here in Birmingham, Recovery Dharma, Smart Recovery, to try to cultivate those spaces, so that people have some place to go, to the extent that they don't like the 12 steps or have had trauma in those rooms. It's empowering to have another choice. So yeah, absolutely.
I
That's
love that.
typically, connecting to myself, connecting to other people. It's really simple because everybody says now that addiction, is really about isolation. So obviously the solution is going to be connection.
So many of us in recovery struggle with feeling overwhelmed by everything that we need to do and discouraged by finding ourselves in repeating patterns of manic action followed by constant distraction. That's why I created a free journal exercise that can help you find a balanced path forward by resolving those competing parts. It's a practice that will help you regain control over your life so that you can make progress on your most important goals. To download it, just visit innercompassprogram.com. Now, back to the show. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I feel like I'm going to have to take a clip of what you said about your morning routine and put it on like a little repeat
Mm.
for myself. That was so good. I wanted to ask a couple clarifying questions. You mentioned mood altering substances, and there's a lot of there's a lot of debate about what that is. Are you like a total purist where you're just like no caffeine, no sugar?
No, no. I do drink caffeine, and I believe in medically assisted treatment. I believe if you are working with a doctor or a psychiatrist and you're taking the medications that are prescribed to you as they are prescribed, I believe in harm reduction.
Yeah, me too.
I believe in all those things. So I'm not a purist by any means. I'm a big believer in like let's like some people are like, oh, I'm going to do all this at once. I'm going to quit. I'm gonna quit doing heroin and I'm gonna quit vaping and I'm gonna quit. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like they're like, but isn't that a crutch? And I'm like, yeah, but when you're hurt, you need a crutch,
I know.
like so.
When did crutch become a bad thing?
Right. So, no, I'm not a purist. I did go through a period in early recovery where like the pendulum swung the other way, really,
Yeah,
as
that's normal.
black or white thinking, and I became a vegan and I didn't drink coffee, and I was just really like miserable.
Miserable?
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, different strokes for different folks. I don't eat a lot of sugar and stuff. Part of my story is like that I had this really bad health issue years ago, and that's kind of like how I came into recovery in a way. So I try to take good care of my body now because obviously an active
Mhm.
addiction. I kind of think of my active addiction as like having a low key death wish. Like I was really pushing myself physically, mentally, emotionally beyond the brink. If you'd asked me, are you suicidal? I would have said no. But then if you looked at how I was living my life, you would have been like, this dude's trying to kill himself.
Yeah.
So yeah, taking care of myself holistically, and trying to be balanced and in harmony in all the things. That's so important to do. And by going to meetings and by going to therapy, that gives me an opportunity again to receive that feedback from somebody else who has either the same or different experiences and can be like, hey, like I see you doing this thing, right? Like sometimes the things that help us can end up hurting us too. Like rock climbing, for example, was a big part of my early recovery routine, and it was very healthy for me. But then COVID came along, and the only thing that was open was the rock climbing gym. And I started going rock climbing at the gym 5 or 6 times a week, which is not good for your body. Like it's too much wear and tear.
Yeah.
And it reached a point that I had to declare abstinence from rock climbing, right? So in recovery, like I was saying at the beginning with the William Glasser book, like that impulsivity and compulsivity, it wants to go someplace new. It's like playing whack-a-mole, it's like, okay, I got the substances, but now maybe it manifests as, technology or sex or gambling or whatever. And I have to constantly be evolving and really taking stock of like, okay, these are my intentions, but like, what are my behaviors like, and how am I showing up for myself and others, and how might I need to tweak things, because what worked for me again, like sometimes, you know, I think of the Vikings, like when the Vikings would invade a foreign country, they would land on the shores and then they would turn around and they would burn their boats, basically saying like
That was
this,
the Vikings that did that? I thought that was
I,
just some sort of motivational story. That was a real thing?
I think that's a real thing. I think it was like I mean, that's my understanding. I wasn't there for the Vikings, but my understanding is that like it was like an intimidation thing, right? Like we're not
We have
going
no
down.
choice. We're
Like
going
we're
forward.
yeah, like
Yeah.
including for their own soldiers, right? Like we're taking away your opportunity for
Yeah.
escape. But I also like to think of it in recovery as like sometimes the raft that got me through these rapids, and like sometimes that now I'm on the shore and I need to go, inward. And like, I don't need to carry this raft with me. Like, if
Right,
I keep
right.
doing these practices that I don't need to do anymore and I'm not adapting and changing, because yeah, in early recovery, I was like, these are the 6 things that I do. I meditate, I go to the meeting, it became very rigid. And
Yeah.
being fluid, being flexible, I think that that's like a sign of health in recovery. You never want to be the guy who's white knuckling it, because they're just like, oh, this is how I do it, like we were
That's no
talking about
fun.
before. No,
That's no
not at
fun.
all.
No fun to be around. No fun to be. Yeah,
No,
that's good.
no.
If you could go back to, how long have you been sober?
5.5 years.
If you could go back 5.5 years to the beginning when you first started, what's one thing that you wish you would have known?
Wow. One thing that I wish I would have known. I wish I would have known that recovery and maybe life in general is not so much a self-improvement project as it is a self-acceptance project.
That is probably the best answer I've ever heard.
Oh, well, thank you.
That is so good.
I
Yeah, it's
think,
a self.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like it's like it's more of a, I had a sponsor once tell me that recovery was about recovering your whole self, the good, and then
yeah,
what you consider the bad. She would
absolutely.
say, she challenged me, can you love your unlovable parts? And that kind of set the gauntlet for me. And I was like, whoa, can I? And I think I have, but that is sort of the path. But I love that. Yeah, self-acceptance and
Yeah. I love what you said. It's a reconciliation of the parts that I have rejected and tried to hide from myself and from others, and just an acceptance of my humanity. Like, I'm going to be messy sometimes. Okay. I'm going to be reactive.
we messy.
And in going through the world, as I did in early, throughout active addiction, to many people, I appeared as if I had it all together all the time. I was very adept at kind of hiding what was happening beneath the mask. And to be able to take off the mask now and just be myself. And sometimes it is messy, but I like you. It sounded like internal family systems, which you were describing with the
What?
parts. And yeah, like, which is really
Yeah,
great. And it's stuff that I've gotten into doing a little bit.
I'm obsessed with IFS mostly
Yeah.
because I haven't shared this yet, but I struggled with this one part of myself, this victim mentality, and I like hated it. And it wasn't until and the people that embody that mentality, I rail against. And I can't even coach those people because
I tend to attract like the high achievers, people who accept too much responsibility, right? It's easier to get somebody to back off of responsibility than try to get someone to take responsibility. But
Mhm.
I hated it in myself until I started doing internal family systems. And I knew I couldn't hate myself well. I knew I couldn't cut parts out of me. But it wasn't until I started doing IFS that I recognized, like truly, truly recognized that that victim part of me was trying to help me. And there was something happened where I finally crossed the bridge of loving that part, the part that I hated. Like I can't overstate how much I hated that part.
Mhm.
Like I'm
Yeah.
super driven and ambitious, and I hated that part, but it wasn't until, and so I have experienced like this softening towards myself that I, in 30 years of recovery, have never been able to achieve.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, if I reject any part of myself, it will manifest in harmful ways. And the idea being in Buddhism, what they teach is that like when you encounter someone who deeply annoys or agitates you, that this person is actually your wise teacher because
Yes.
there is something that this person is doing that reminds you of that part of you that you reject. So it
Yeah.
gives you that opportunity to like love and embrace this person outside of yourself and in the process soften. I like that word and kind of soothe that part of yourself inside that you're rejecting. And they also teach us this practice. We call it having tea with our demons, where basically when you encounter this thing inside you that you don't like, for you, it might be that victim mentality. For me, it can manifest very similarly, like as a not good enough,
Yeah.
like poor me type thing that's happening. And just like visualizing that part of yourself and like having tea with it and embracing it and smiling at it and being friendly with it, as opposed to kind of the way I think we are conditioned growing up, which is to reject it and suppress it. And if we resist it, it just persists and grows stronger. But if
Mhm.
we feel that feeling, we can heal that feeling. And that's really so much of what we do in recovery is I think aimed at that, like looking at the things that we've done and the things that we don't like, not in a way so as to shame ourselves, but in a way to identify these patterns and these beliefs so that when we feel them and think them, we can intervene and we can be like, okay, like I know where that gets me. I can play that tape out. Instead, like, how about I respond like skillfully in this moment?
Yeah, make a different choice. And it's only in the present moment when we recognize it. Like it takes so much awareness, and when we recognize it, and then for me, it like takes courage to choose different. And sometimes it helps to know ahead of time, like what choice to make. Because I tend to go in that cybernetic loop of I have the feeling and then a thought, and then I like to make a conclusion. And then based off of that conclusion, I take action, and then I invoke the law of cause and effect. And then I end up,
Right.
I'm in my loop. And so
Yeah.
I've done my loop so many times. It's been so helpful to have other people go, hey, it's,
Right.
there's a, like the limiting belief is missing information or incorrect information. It's been so helpful to have other people to just be like, here's a different perspective and here's something different you can do.
Right.
And then so when I start getting twisted up like that, like just being like, oh, that's right. This I can try this other thing, because I feel like we're all making choices best with the best information that we have, but it's
Hmm.
not until like I have another option that makes sense that I'm able to do anything different.
Absolutely. And I think so many times, like we identify things that as problems that are really not problems. Like I wake up in the morning and I immediately start trying to solve everything around me, thinking that that'll keep
That's
me
normal,
safe.
right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the human brain is designed to do that, right? Like
Right, yeah.
the reptilian part of the brain is
Yeah.
scanning for threats. Like there
Yes.
might be a saber-toothed tiger in the hallway. I don't know, but now I'm anxious about it. And I think that's like how we survive. Some people talk about survival of the fittest and they think like the strongest and the fastest. But I think that honestly, like my ancestors were probably like climbing up trees and like watching their mates get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. So it's really survival of the most anxious, right? And the most like careful. So I'm always trying to solve a problem. My mind wants a puzzle to solve.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. The problem is I always think there's a problem, and then I get caught up, like I'm in a labyrinth, and I'm like, there's a right choice, and I need to make the right choice. So I need to read all this stuff online. I need to talk to people, because if it's catastrophizing, if I don't make the right choice, then everything's going to go terrible. So recently in recovery, I've embraced the idea of like, do it or don't do it, and you'll regret it both ways.
I was not expecting that.
No, well, like the idea is that there's always going to be costs and there's always going to be benefits. And in the present moment, I cannot see the future. I don't know if I knock over this domino instead of that domino. Like if I get caught up in trying to create an outcome, I'm probably going to create one that is not working for me. Instead, if, like you were saying, in the present moment, if I can focus on the process and based on the understanding capacity that I have, like what's the skillful choice to make that I think will cause the least amount of harm, then it becomes very simple. But I need to like let go of this belief that I can somehow like baby-proof life, and trauma-proof myself. Because the world's going to continue to act on me in harmful ways, and I'm going to continue to be human. And part of that is making mistakes,
Yeah, no, that's huge. I love everything you said. I wish I was taking notes that whole time, because there were so many things that you said that were so good. We do have like this negativity bias, and it is very difficult. And the truth of the matter is like we are encouraged to be afraid all the time. This is why I don't watch the news. It's like terrorism on my nervous system. I just can't. I can't do it. I'm not one of those people, and I don't have my head in the sand. You know what I have found is that if it's important enough, people will be talking about it.
Very much so. Very much so.
I try not to indulge in that too much.
Right.
And, releasing perfectionism has been an ongoing thing too. Is that rooted in anxiety for you, do you think?
Yeah, I think the idea is that if I do everything right, then I'll be okay, and I'll be safe, and others will approve of me and like me, and then I'll be in control. And it all goes back to control and security in a way.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're being bombarded. Like the human brain was not designed to be with all this stimulation and all of these messages, kind of, driving us towards consumption of things that we don't necessarily even need or want, but selling us this idea that if I have this car or this makeup or whatever it might be, that then I'll be happy. And it's this like conditional happiness that like, I can't be happy now, but then, and as someone who achieved highly and had all of the things, like I can tell you that I woke up every morning in despair. I woke up every morning and I needed my medicine in order to get up and go and do this thing that was killing me spiritually, so that I could acquire a life that to others would look perfect. And in recovery, it's like the opposite of that. It's again like embracing that acceptance rather than improvement, and that understanding that like things that are broken are still beautiful. Things that might be flawed, in many ways, the flaws can accentuate and highlight their beauty, like the moon. It's got craters all over it, and it's gorgeous, right? People stare at it and write love poems about it. The Japanese art of kintsugi. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I was just gonna say kintsugi. I was gonna say it wrong, so I didn't jump in. But
I don't know if I'm saying it right. But again, like it's okay if I'm not.
But what is kintsugi? We should probably.
It's like it's a Japanese art where when a pot or a dish or something breaks, they take this delicate gold wax and they piece it back together, so you can see exactly how it was broken. And in doing that, the pot becomes more beautiful and actually is like just as strong, if not stronger. And I think that's like a beautiful metaphor for recovery. This idea that like we're lucky because like if not for what happened to us, where we went through these really difficult times and had to learn a new way to be in the world, like we might have just continued to stay asleep for our whole lives and
Yeah.
never taken a harder look at the things that were driving us. So, I mean, what a gift, a painful gift, but what a gift nonetheless.
I have a friend who says alcoholism is the best, worst thing that ever happened to me.
Oh yeah.
I
I
love that.
mean, I do too. And I try to remember that now because now I might not drink and use, but like I still make mistakes and things still happen to me that in the moment I don't like it and I think it shouldn't have happened and so on and so forth. And I try to remember that these things that are dumping on me, I could say, pour me another, as they say in the rooms, right? Or I could say, this is fertilizer. Like I'm being fertilized for growth by this thing that's
Perspective.
impacting me, right? And if I live in that solution oriented, growth oriented, process oriented mindset, then I almost start to look forward to those obstacles because they give me information. I don't have to judge them as good or bad. I'm just like, oh, this is just like information. Like maybe I feel a lot of people talk about negative emotions. They say, oh, I'm sad. Oh, I'm angry. I shouldn't feel this way. This is negative. This is bad. And I tell people like, why is it bad? Like your anger is just spurring you towards advocating for yourself or making a decision that's different that could be helpful to you. Your sadness is it's the same thing. It's just showing you it's human to feel sad, first of all. And second of all, maybe this is an opportunity to like feel that feeling and nurture yourself and then take some action whereby you don't feel it as often, or, maybe it's a relationship or a job or whatever is impacting you in this way. Like use it to grow karmically instead of just marinating in those feelings.
Resisting. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Or yeah, pretending that they don't exist. So that's what I like about the rooms in particular is that you can just show up and you can just say whatever,
And they do.
right. And there's really nowhere else that I'm aware of where you can just like, and you can go anywhere. You can go from Albuquerque to Amsterdam, and there's a room of people doing this almost every hour of every day somewhere, and you can find them. And that's such a gift because obviously in all of these places as well, there's a bar or a dealer's house or something else. So a big part of recovery, I think, is, yeah, like going into those new spaces and just seeing how many other people are coping and dealing with the same thing. Because I know in my case, I stayed sick for a long time and I don't like that language. I'm trying to not use like sick, right? Because like sick, dirty, clean, like there's stigma behind it. But
we know what you mean.
right. Just the idea that there were so many people who had changed and healed their lives, like, and I didn't know it. I kind of told myself that fixed false belief of like, this is just the way I am. And I don't know anyone else who's overcome this. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy is what it does.
Yeah.
So yeah, going to treatment, finding these other fellowships, and working the steps as well. I did work the steps. What happened to me is, I'm in Alabama. So the AA rooms down here are a little more religious, I would say, than in many other places.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like,
if you're religious, it's okay.
if you're religious, it's great, actually.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times I've thought to myself, man, if I could just give this over to a higher power, like that would be so ideal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, what I love about your book, The Skeptic's 12 Steps, is that you really dissect the languaging that turns people off, and you
Did you read it already?
Yeah, I've checked it out, and I've listened to your podcast about it. Yeah. Well, no, as I was telling
Love you for that.
as I was telling you before we started, like if that book had existed in 2018, like there's a chance that I never would have started practicing Recovery Dharma, which might have been bad for Recovery Dharma, but it would have been good perhaps for me.
Isn't that funny?
So yeah, like when I went to treatment, I remember giving some pushback to my group therapist because I didn't like the powerless language. I didn't like the higher power language. All the things that you literally, all the things that you talk about in your book were issues that I had with the program. They would take us on the druggy buggy every night to a different meeting. And in those rooms, and you speak to this, sometimes the program as applied is not what's in the literature, right?
Exactly.
People
Yeah.
are wagging their fingers, they're blowing
Oh,
smoke in your face, they're telling you that you shared wrong, or that, and that kind of thing is a huge turnoff to a lot of newcomers. And again, that's not the program's fault. It's kind of like the Bible. Like I read the New Testament and then I go to some churches and I'm like, what's going on
oh,
here?
yeah.
Like these don't align.
Can I tell you a little story? This
Sure.
lady interviewed me recently, and she has gone super religious and super conservative and super right leaning. And listen, I would love to say I have no judgment about that, but I do. But we were talking about Jesus, and I love me some Jesus.
Yeah,
But
that's
you know what I
awesome.
told her? I don't typically like people who like Jesus
Oh,
because and listen, that's not fair because that's like, I realize that that's a limiting belief. I'm the resistance I hold because that's like saying I went to an AA meeting and there was some asshole there and they were holding the big book. And so they relate the person to the big book. And I go,
right.
okay, I get it. I get it. We're not all, we're not all the same.
No.
There's good and bad or challenging people. I don't even like to use the terms good and bad. I bet you can appreciate this too,
Yeah.
because the people, like you were saying earlier, the people that upset me the most, and I was so offended by that idea when I first heard it early in recovery, that the people who challenge you the most, or the people that you don't like the most, are your greatest teachers. And I was like, bet. I don't
Right.
have shit to learn from those people. But you're right. It's like it's parts like in IFS they call them exiles, and I have come to understand that people are just mirrors. They're just reflecting
Hmm.
back to me what I love or don't love about myself.
Absolutely.
Helpful information.
And again, like when I read the big book, like there's a lot in there that was so helpful to me. And in early recovery, I needed to figure out some kind of concept of the higher power that worked for me. And one day I was in group therapy and I was giving some pushback about it. And I was sitting in, like a chair, and my group therapist said, like, hey, if I can prove to you that a higher power exists, like, will you believe in one? And I was like, yeah, I'm game. And he's like, all right, like, can you make yourself levitate in that chair? And I was like, no, like, obviously I can't. And he's like, so if I could make you levitate in the chair, would you believe in a higher power? And I was like, yep. And he's like, okay, Andrew, Bob, Bill, Cameron, each of you walk up to the chair and grab one leg. Okay, now each of you hoist him up off the ground. And they picked me up and then they put me down. And he's like, I just made you levitate off the ground in the air. Your higher power is Andrew, Bob, Bill, and Cameron. It was that, yeah, it was a realization of like,
What a
okay,
visceral experience, huh?
yeah, it can be a person, it can be a place, it can be a process, it can be all
Yeah.
of these things. And in Recovery Dharma, we talk about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And that just means the Buddha is, do I believe that I'm empowered to change and heal my life? The Dharma is like, do I believe that these teachings can help me? The Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. And then the Sangha is the community of people on the path with me. So that is the higher power of the Recovery Dharma program, right? It's the people, it's the teachings, it's the belief in myself. And once I was like, okay, I'm making excuses here is what I'm doing. Like, I don't want to do this. And that's why I'm throwing up all these, rationalizations about why it won't work. So I worked the steps. It took
Out of
9.
fear, by the way. That's why.
Yeah,
And that's where self-compassion comes in.
absolutely.
We're afraid. We're afraid. You know what's funny is when the first draft of the book that I wrote, I was so angry that the developmental editor, she's like, "You're very angry, and you're not going to help anybody." And I was like, "Ow," but okay. So I rewrote it like 6 times. But yeah, it's just so funny that if I was lacking compassion, and not really. I just needed, she goes, you needed to get that out. But now write the book from a place of compassion. She goes, the truth of the matter is those people are afraid. And I was
Yeah,
like, oh, fuck. Okay.
Absolutely. I don't want to be seen. Like it's a crazy push-pull where it's like I want nothing more than to be understood and loved, but just from
Don't see me.
6 feet away, please. Like love and understand me from over there across the room.
Isn't that funny? Like people that are not watching this, and people that are listening to the podcast are not gonna be able to see it, but it's the hand up, like
Right.
stop.
Yeah.
And it's the other hand, like come here. The push pull. It's like go away, but come here.
It's so confusing.
See me, but don't look at me.
Yeah. But I worked the steps and I did them.
Awesome.
It took 9 months working
pretty
with a
good.
sponsor, and we met every week and we talked on the phone almost every night during that time. And that person did such a beautiful act of service for me. And I recognize that it helped them as well in a way. But
For sure.
doing that fourth, fifth, and the eighth,
magic.
ninth, like those to me that's where the meat and potatoes are. Identifying those patterns of behavior, taking accountability, making a plan, that solution oriented part of it towards the end. And it's not super complicated either. It's like I'm going to carry the message, and that's what I did. I also started going to these recovery Dharma meetings and these smart recovery meetings, and like I said at the outset, like it really is all the same tea in different cups. What I liked better about those spaces was, first of all, the people just seemed to be living with a little more ease, especially in the recovery Dharma spaces. And it could have just been that particular group of people, right? It might not have anything to do with the programs. I will say that I think the recovery Dharma program is a little more compassion oriented.
Is it?
Yes, it's less, identifying oneself as an alcoholic or addict. Some say the chip system that is used, which again, I don't know that that's in the book. I think that that's sort of an outgrowth of the community. Some people can find those things shame inducing, right? Having to say that I'm an addict, and I don't have a problem with it, but I know people that do. And then again, like the idea that if you relapse, and I'm not saying even in the 12 steps, like that's not a thing where like you get shamed before the group, but I think there's these misperceptions. And whereas,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can I ask you a question about how they do it in Atlanta? Because I'm from California, and if somebody relapses, they stand up and introduce themselves. They say, that doesn't happen where you're at. The look on your face, you're like, what?
No, I mean, at the end when they give the chips, right? Like a silver chip. So somebody would stand up to get the silver chip.
And that's how you know someone relapsed?
Unfortunately, then also in many and again, this doesn't have anything to do with the program or the book, but there's almost a shunning and you're now back at the beginning type thing that happens where it's like, you don't speak for a while, you listen because, get the cotton out of your ears type, kind of the toxic parts of the program kind of can come out in those moments. And then what happens is people don't go back.
Specific.
Yeah.
That's meeting specific.
Very much.
I'm always talking about meetings and the steps are two different things.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times it's the people that are problematic, and it's good to go to meetings where you feel loved and supported. But I was I just wanted to clarify, like when somebody like where I went to meetings, if they'll ask for newcomers, are there any newcomers in the first 30 days of sobriety? And people will stand up and say, my name is Arlina, I'm an alcoholic. And then they sit down and everybody claps. We're clappers in California. Everyone goes, yay, welcome back. And it's like, that's our signal that we go love on that person. But there are some people who are chronic relapsers, and it becomes like this shaming thing, and that becomes their identity as I'm a chronic relapser. And I'm like, no. I know your eyes get big. It's like, no. That's not a thing. We don't, that's not the point. And so when I actually interviewed Dr. Anna Lemke, who wrote Dopamine Nation, and she talks about AA and 12 steps, and she talks about pro-social shame, where it's sort of like a little different spin on shame, where it's like a negative consequence that you can use to your advantage.
Right.
And I got to tell you, I was very prideful, and I did not want to have to stand up every day for 30 days again. And that was a big that kind of
Yeah,
actually helped me in the beginning. But I recognize that not everybody feels that way, and
absolutely.
it's not actually in the book to do that.
No, some people want the carrot and some people don't want the stick, and that's okay. Different strokes for different folks. What I liked about Recovery Dharma, was that it was Buddhist inspired, but not required. Like you didn't have to be a Buddhist. You didn't have to believe in anything in order to be a member. It was radically inclusive. It embraced all addictions of all kinds in one space. So anyone could
Oh,
show up who was dealing with anything. They didn't
nice.
have to word their shares in a certain way. And it's not unusual to go to a meeting and there's many different types of addiction represented, many different types of people with diverse backgrounds represented. Um, and again, it's a very holistic program and it's a trauma informed program. So what we did is we took these ancient teachings of the Buddha, 2,600-year-old teachings, and
Mm.
then we took the modern understanding of like trauma and addiction, and we kind of put them together to make something new. So I started doing a lot of Recovery Dharma here in Birmingham, and then a couple years later, I ran for the board of directors and I eventually became the president of the board of directors and then worked for Recovery Dharma Global in trying to basically get the program to go mainstream. Like, kind of like Johnny Appleseed going around and helping people all around start meetings. And now there's over 800 meetings and there's almost a meeting every hour of every day online. And again, it replicates the best aspects of the 12 steps. We have what we call the inquiries, which are basically our version of the steps. It has
Okay, I was going to ask about that.
it has a lot of similar like questions aimed at looking at the wreckage of the past in a redemptive way, trying to identify solutions for moving forward. What are my resources? Who can help me? And then we have
Wow, that's so
mentors.
practical.
Hmm. Yeah, I do. I think it's a very, the book isn't very long. It's you can get the book for free on our website, recoverydharma.org.
I did not know
And
that.
it's very solution oriented, very compassion based. And there's lots of, if you're looking for a meeting for a specific identity, be it women, BIPOC, LGBTQ, all of those things exist as well, either online or if you're in a big city, they might have those things.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but are those meetings listed on a site called intherooms.com?
I
Do they?
think that I think that some of the meetings might be on In the Rooms. I know that they're all on recoverydharma.org. That's
Oh,
kind of
okay.
like the main
That's the hub.
that's the main meeting list. Most of them are on the Buddhist Recovery Network's website as well. And there are other organizations that are doing Buddhist inspired recovery. And again, it's all the same tea in different cups. There's refuge recovery, there's 8-step recovery, there's even some guys who call themselves the Hungry Ghosts, and they're more meditation based.
I love
Um,
that. That's
yeah,
it. Is that the realm of hungry ghosts? I know Gabor
right.
Mate wrote a book about that, but he
Hmm.
got it from Buddhist teachings.
Right, right.
Got it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. This idea of craving, this idea that addiction is really rooted in craving and not just craving for drugs and alcohol, but craving for my life to be different than it is and craving to be able to control how I feel. And I had back in 2017, before I got sober, I had this really traumatic health issue called Guillain-Barré
Oh,
syndrome. Yeah.
tell me about that. What is that?
It is a rare autoimmune disease where, like throughout your body, your nerves are coated with this stuff called myelin. It's kind of like
Yeah.
the
The myelin
protective,
sheath. Yeah.
right? Yeah, and Guillain-Barré syndrome strips the myelin off of all of your
Oh.
nerves and does damage to the underlying axon. So it interrupts communication from your brain to all of the various parts of your body. So I was paralyzed and locked in my body and on a ventilator for a couple months, just having a really bad time. And during that time, actually, when I was in the neuro ICU, and for a period of 45 days, I couldn't communicate with anyone, even though I was fully conscious.
You were
Um,
literally paralyzed.
yeah, I was paralyzed from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. I could not move any part of my
Oh
body.
my God, Randy, that's crazy.
It was crazy. They don't really know what happened to me. There's like many different theories. Bless you.
Thank you. Excuse me.
And but yeah, like I had been abusing 3 different types of amphetamines at the same
So
time.
maybe
Yeah,
it
there was
was related to that.
some neurotoxicity could have triggered it.
Possibly.
And I was also doing all kinds of other stuff, smoking weird stuff. Like I had an upper respiratory infection. It was probably a combination of all these things, to be
What do you mean
honest.
smoking weird stuff other than like weed or meth or?
Oh, just like, yeah. That's about it. And so, yeah, just like not taking good care of
Seems
myself.
normal to me.
Yeah, exactly. That's something weird about that.
What's weird about that? I hear about that every day.
So, that process, when I was in the neuro ICU, and it was obviously just like, it was physically torturous, but it was emotionally and psychologically like very traumatic. I would have these hallucinations and delusions, and I would see these things. And then later, when I read that book by Dr. Mate, it was like, that's what I was seeing, these hungry ghosts with the pin mouths. Because like I was going through withdrawal at the same time. So I was having these just intense cravings.
Oh my God.
So I always think of that when I think of addiction. I think about that idea of like really, as they say, like one's too many and 10,000's not enough, right? Like that idea of just more. Like
more.
I always said that if I wrote an autobiography, it would be More, Better, Different, the Randy Hall story, right? Because like I always want
you need
more.
to write that book.
Do
you have plans? Do you have plans to
No,
write it?
I don't.
Come on, Randy.
I wrote a poetry book actually that I released
You need to write a
earlier
memoir.
this year. Well, I have an interesting story, and
we didn't even get to your story.
Yeah, well, we've kind of gotten through a lot of it, but
kind of started solution first. I usually start with story first, but
no, I mean that my story is simple. Like I ingested high quantities of mood altering substances, alcohol, marijuana.
Why?
But why? Isn't that
Did you have like trauma stuff when you were young? Is it kind of that type of story?
Everybody wants to know why when they first come into the rooms. They're like,
I needed to know why.
Yeah, and well, I mean, how can you know how if you don't know why, right? Like if you can't diagnose the problem, then how can you prescribe a solution? So there's a lot of different things that can impact a person that can result in them using substances. There's a genetic predisposition.
There is.
And if you look at my family tree, right, you're going to see a lot of people with addiction and mental health issues.
Okay.
So there's that. Then also there's trauma, right? There's trauma, and then there's shame because of the trauma. And I definitely dealt with some of that as well, including this medical crisis that I had. But going back to when I was a child, there was intense pressures to succeed. And,
what did your parents do for a living?
My father was
successful?
Yes, my father was a very successful lawyer, and my mother was a history professor at a college. And again, like some of it was external pressure, but I think a lot of it was pressure I put on myself to succeed as well. I went to a very competitive prep school where everybody graduated and went to like Ivy League type schools. In kindergarten, we wore a little coat and tie to school.
For heaven's sake. So you were programmed early on.
I was programmed, yes, to be a high achiever. And I was a high achiever, and I went to a very good college. I went to Vanderbilt. Then I went to law school at the University of Florida.
Fancy.
Yeah, no, I was a fancy boy. Like they spent over $1 million on my brain, probably.
Are you serious?
Like, well, I mean, when you add it all up, Vanderbilt's not cheap. So I became a lawyer, and I was a good lawyer, and it was lucrative, but I was miserable, as I mentioned.
What kind of law did you do?
Oh, I was a corporate defense litigator. So I was like the bad guy in the movies who comes in and like crushes the little guy, right?
That had to feel not good.
It didn't, but I kind of, I tell people this sometimes, and sometimes they laugh and sometimes they don't, but I would get up in the morning with so much despair in my heart and heaviness on my chest. And I would go and look in the mirror and I would say, you can do this today. You're a sociopath. You can do this. Like that was my morning ritual, was to convince myself that I was a sociopath so that I could go out there and harm people and not feel bad about it.
Oh, shit.
But obviously I did feel bad about it. And I kind of used amphetamines to fuel my ability to go and work long hours and outthink and outsmart other people.
Were
I
you like
thought,
the 80-hour work week guy type of thing?
yeah, maybe not that many, but certainly if we were in trial or something, I would travel all over the country doing these arbitrations and stuff. And yeah, we would work until nighttime, and then we would drink until morning, and then we would work. And amphetamines, Adderall, that kind of stuff fuels a lot of that lifestyle. And I thought that the amphetamines were helping me, but over time I became more and more addicted, and I became more and more manic and less and less reliable. And eventually I decided to quit being a lawyer, and I became a teacher.
I'm sorry, but did you get in trouble at work?
No.
They were never like,
No, they were never. I don't know that anyone knew what was going on. There was certainly times that I was like not there because I was, I was erratic, right? Like when I was on, but
and
when
they
I was
loved you
off,
for that, huh?
yeah, they did. And I think maybe they looked the other way when I wasn't on. And that's, again, like I'm not blaming anyone other than myself. I certainly was good at hiding what was happening. Very few people knew really the depth of, the addiction that I was experiencing. I thought that if I stopped being a lawyer, I would stop being a drug addict, which was, magical thinking. This idea that if I change places or jobs, something internal will change. And so I became a teacher, and I was a great teacher. I taught at Birmingham City Schools downtown, and I learned a lot about resilience, and, from my students, and I taught them a lot, and I was very helpful to them. And I love many of them, and I still have relationships with many of them and try to help them and encourage them. But I was still a drug addict. Like I was still ingesting huge quantities of amphetamines. I was kind of like Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society. I was like super stimulating. Then I got so sick in 2017. And that sort of interrupted my teaching career. And then I started doing things, with Recovery Dharma.
So let me just stop you for a second, because so it was in 2017 when you say you got sick, and that's when like the paralysis happened.
Right,
How long was
right.
that recovery from the illness?
Ooh, well, I was in the neuro ICU for a couple months, and then I went to this hospital in Atlanta called the Shepherd Center, which is a neuro rehabilitation hospital. And I was there for about 4 months. So it took about 6 months for me to return home.
Holy shit.
And then it was like another 6 months of doing physical therapy, out of my home before I could like really walk. And I wasn't back to baseline, but I could like take care of myself again, I guess you could say. So yeah, what's interesting is like I've continued to improve ever since then. And people will frequently ask me like, hey, like how much better do you think you are? Do you think you're like 75, 80% what you were before you got sick? And I always tell them like I'm 177% what I was before I got sick, because I was really not taking care of myself before I got sick. And now I live a much healthier life. So in many ways, again, just like with the addiction, like I am so fortunate and lucky that the higher power, or whatever you want to call it, came down and stopped me from being able to hurt myself, for that period of time. Now, the truth is I did not get sober then. That was not the thing that got me sober. As soon as I could walk and talk and take care of myself again, I walked my way to the bar, right? And I started taking amphetamines again because I wanted to go back to work. And I was taking all this Neurontin, gabapentin for my nerve pain, and it made me really lethargic. So I was like, if I could just take some speed, right? Like I could, right. Again, yeah, the chemist trying to adjust it. And really quickly, it wasn't going to work. Like my body, after what it had been through, could not do it like it used to do it. I couldn't handle it. So that's when I started trying, the outpatient first, and then the inpatient when the outpatient didn't work. And I tell people in early recovery, they're like, what should I do? And I tell them, I'm like, you should perhaps like take advantage of all the support and resources that are available to you.
Yeah, all of it.
If you can go inpatient, I know there's a stigma. People think they're going to go in and it's going to be like Skid Row, and there's going to be, but like if I could go back to inpatient rehab now, it's like vacation, you're like doing all this therapy, you have all this time to like do the inner work. Like it's actually great.
I had no idea that rehab was a thing when I got sober. I just went to a ton of meetings, and now there's all these like bougie rehabs and stuff that are super nice.
Yeah.
They cost an outrageous amount of money, so I know that's sort of like a privileged option. But
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know. I think maybe you should suffer a little bit. I don't think you should be too comfortable in the rehab.
in
Yeah.
rehab.
I don't know. I think it's a double-edged sword, like you were saying. Like, the idea is that you're going to be feeling some feelings for the first time that you probably haven't felt because you've been suppressing through the use of the substances. So it's good to have, it's good to have trained therapeutic professionals there to help you with that. And honestly, a lot of times, like removing people from the environment in which they are sick is pretty critical. It's hard to heal in the place that you got sick. It's all about making a plan, like coming together, trying the different pathways, getting that deeper knowledge and understanding. And that's what I did. I learned about the genetic predisposition. I learned about how my trauma was impacting me. I learned about how my physical pain from the Guillain-Barré was driving me, especially with the marijuana use to try to cope with that. And then obviously like the frequency, intensity, and duration of my use, I'd used for 20 years on a daily basis. Like that's hard to interrupt. And then finally, like myself and many others, like there's co-occurring disorders, OCD, ADHD, depression, PTSD. These things, often people are self-medicating themselves.
Right. Not knowing that
there's, working with a psychiatrist. In my case, I'd actually been taking antidepressants for many years, but of course I'd been ingesting huge quantities of depressants by drinking. And it was the first time I'd ever gone to a psychiatrist, and she actually like looked at me and listened to me talk instead of just like throwing pills at me. And ultimately what she said is she was like, I think we're just going to take you off everything. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, what about my ADHD? And she's like, yeah, well, anything that I could give you for that, you would just abuse, right? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, okay. So yeah, like I've learned through mindfulness and through other techniques how to like cope and exist in the world with some of these co-occurring disorders. It's not necessarily easy, but I believe that everybody's neurodivergent. All of these things are spectrums. All of these things, like to label somebody as something, and then they go through life identifying, kind of like you were saying with the chronic relapsers, right? Like that's a problematic belief because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, this is just what I do. I'm a chronic relapser. And maybe, just because you haven't figured it out yet doesn't mean you're not going to figure it out eventually. And even to the extent that you do have a relapse, what an opportunity for growth. What an opportunity to try something new. Smart Recovery does a really great job with relapse, where if somebody has a relapse and they're open and vulnerable with the group, we'll do what we call an ABC. It's kind of like a post-mortem, where we look at the activating event that led to the relapse. We look at the beliefs that were caused by that event. And then we look at the consequence, which was the ingestion of the substance. So somebody might come in and they might say, well, my family was having Thanksgiving dinner and I had to go. And when I got there, my father was being really difficult and I couldn't deal with that without drinking wine. And like, we can be like, okay, stop. Okay. You had to go. That's the first thing we're going to look at, right?
That's an assumption.
Right. Did you have to go? And then, your father, like you couldn't, like you had to have a glass of wine. And like sometimes people, again, the problem with my beliefs is that I believe them. So yeah, I mean, Smart Recovery has been another big part of my recovery journey. I've kind of done that contemporaneously with Recovery Dharma. And, it's got 4 pillars, and those pillars, really briefly are building and maintaining motivation. Like if I don't have the motivation to make this change in my life or maintain it, then I'm not going to. So how do I identify my values and align my behavior with my values? And they have all kinds of tools for doing that. And the second part is coping with urges. Once I've made the decision, I'm going to have lots of cravings. How do I soothe myself? How do I distract myself? How do I keep track of what's causing these urges so that I can kind of avoid things that might be problematic? The third pillar is managing my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, which is obviously a big one. How can I use cognitive behavioral therapy tools in order to dispute my beliefs when they arise? When I tell myself, "Oh, I won't have any fun anymore if I don't use," like how do I interrupt that?
That's a
Right?
big one. That's a
Yeah,
big
that
one.
is a big one, and we have lots of ways of disputing that by showing there were times before you used where you had a great time. When you were 15 years old, you went to Disney World with your family and you had so much fun and you didn't use any substances. And also, we can dispute that using substances has been fun for you, right? Like
Uh-huh.
we can
Oh
look at
yeah.
that one as well. So yeah, every morning when I wake up, I make choices. If I make a choice to use, assuming I don't have some co-occurring disorder that's clouding my judgment, if I make a choice to
Okay.
use, I can just as easily make a choice not to. So, when people quit using, they wake up in the morning, or when they're trying to quit, they'll wake up in the morning and they'll say, "Today's the day. I'm not going to do it." Right. And then by noon or by 10 a.m., they're doing something different. So, what is happening? They're believing something. The human mind is rationalizing. It's like the cartoon with the little angel and the little devil. And that little
Mhm.
devil's there, and they're like, "Nobody will know you deserve this, either because you did a good job or because you're a piece of shit," right? Like, whatever.
Exactly.
Like, so, and we believe that voice, and that voice gets stronger. And in recovery, we strengthen that wiser, more compassionate voice.
Yeah.
And then the last pillar of SMART is just living a balanced life. How do I make sure that I'm taking care of myself? Because it's when I become stressed out and I get burned out that other voice starts to get louder, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that program. I love the Recovery Dharma program. I think like SMART's great for my mind, disputing the beliefs. Recovery Dharma is good for my heart, cultivating the self-compassion, cultivating the mindfulness through meditation. And yeah, like, and each of those programs have really been built upon the blueprint of the 12 steps, which again was so helpful to me in early recovery. So when people in early recovery come to me and ask me what to do, I tell them do all of it. Like like like
Spoken like a true overachiever.
right. Well, yeah,
I did all
for
the
sure.
drugs. I might as well do all those recovery solutions.
My mentor told me, he's like, "Dude, you were a hardcore drug addict. You're gonna need to be a hardcore recovery person as
Yeah.
well." And that's what I've done. And to the extent now, like, to use another Japanese term, have you ever heard of ikigai
Oh
before?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me what it is because I'm not clear. I remember it, but it's like the
So
circles or
yes, ikigai is the idea that, like, in the ideal world, every person would have a profession that satisfied three things. It would be something that they were passionate about and good at. It would be something that they could make money doing, and it would be something that would be helpful to the world. And then where those three circles converge, that's like your purpose or your ikigai.
oh, I love
And
that.
so, I had been a lawyer and I had been a teacher, and I hadn't really found my ikigai. And then in recovery, I read this book, "The Body Keeps the Score" by Bessel van der Kolk, and he did that cross study of trauma survivors and how did they get the
Mhm.
best outcomes. And he determined that the people who like actively go out and advocate and help others who are going through the same thing they went through, that they had the best outcomes. So I was like, well, that's what I'm going to do. So I started really volunteering and being of service locally. Then I ended up working for the Recovery Dharma nonprofit. And then recently I started working for a new nonprofit called the Addiction. Well, it's not a new nonprofit, it's a new job for me, but it's called the Addiction Prevention Coalition here in Birmingham. And it's really working to like end the stigma around addiction and create like resilient recovery communities and educating people on mental health and substance abuse, kind of in the central Alabama area. And this has become my ikigai, like helping others.
Mm.
Nothing helps me more than helping others. So, right now we're in the middle of like an addiction epidemic in America. They say there's more than 50 million people suffering with substance use disorder. I think that number is probably low, honestly.
Yeah.
And of those people, they estimate that only 10% are actually like receiving any kind of treatment. And as we've talked about throughout this podcast, like there is a stigma still associated with addiction. There's a lot of fixed false beliefs about how the addict is selfish and self-centered or lacks willpower. And as we talked about, there's lots of reasons why people engage in addictive behavior, and very few of them have to do with some kind of moral failing of the individual. So how do we combat that stigma? And that's kind of what the APC is doing here in Central Alabama. And recognizing that the problem is really like people's separation from themselves and from others. And that the solution then is connecting ourselves to one another, connecting ourselves to ourselves. And we can do that through providing education to people about substance use disorder, about resources that are available to them to help them to the extent that they or a loved one is struggling, because loved ones, it's a family disease. Like loved ones have to get assistance as well to deal with that overwhelming anxiety and lack of control. So, we can do those things. We can cultivate those communities. We can share those resources. We have a new executive director, Nicole Dossie, who's coming in from St. Louis from another organization and has like a lot of passion and is honestly like super intelligent and super well organized. And I think that like we're going to do a lot of really great things. We host a big walk every year here in Birmingham. It's like the big annual event where all the recovery communities come together on one day to go out into the community and have a good time, honestly, and to show people like, hey, like this is recovery. Recovery is like feeling better about yourself, about creating social connections with others, about like that harmony and that living with ease. Because I think so many people still stay in the substance use and in the addictive behavior with that false belief we were talking about earlier of like, oh, life won't be any fun anymore. It's like, oh no, like
it's just the beginning of the fun.
Right. Oh, there's so much authentic joy that is available to people in sobriety that is not available to you when you're ingesting substances, because you get that simulated euphoria. Sure. Right. Like you take a drug and that's like you just dump that dopamine on your brain. Like you just dump it. And there is this simulated good feeling that you experience. But honestly, like to me, that feeling doesn't compare to like that feeling of authentic joy, after the meeting's over, the meeting after the meeting, when you're sitting around with your friends and you're sharing something vulnerable and they're smiling and they're laughing and they support you. Like that's to me the good stuff. So,
that is the good stuff.
I had friends in active addiction and I love those people and I'm not going to speak poorly of them. But at the same time, like, what were our conversations about? Like we talked about the game. We talked about, we complained about our jobs or our wives or whatever, So the idea that I now have not only a much higher quantity of friends, but a much higher quality of friend, people who have that compassion, and there's that reciprocity too. I sit in their pain with them. They sit in my pain with me. And that's really a beautiful thing. So getting, my new job is mostly based on like peer support and volunteer management, like doing community outreach, and really getting to take these things that I've learned throughout my recovery that I've been so fortunate to like receive from others through the oral tradition that is recovery. And now I get to go out into the community and I get to share that with other people. And that's just a beautiful gift to me. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help more people. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, clearly you were meant for this. Like you did such an amazing job explaining so many complicated ideas in such a simple way that was so helpful. How can people reach out to you if they're curious about, maybe different programs, or maybe they just want to get some advice from you? How do people connect with you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram at Randallwestlyhall, all one word. You could send me an email at randy@apcbham.org. You could contact me through I also run another Instagram account for survivors of Guillain-Barré syndrome. So if you're someone who's listening to this podcast, it's a rare disease. They say 1 in 100,000 people get it. But to the extent that you're out there and you're listening and you've had an experience with GBS or CIDP, which is like a chronic version of GBS, like feel free to reach out to me as well. I have an Instagram page called The Faces of Guillain-Barré and C. diff, where I share survivor stories and I share resources, again, to cultivate that healthy community of people who can support one another. And, having someone else who understands the experience that you're going through is so invaluable, no matter what you're going through. And for people with rare diseases and chronic illnesses, it's even more important because it's such a small pool of people. So, check that out as well. And yeah.
I'll leave links to all this in the show notes for those of you who are driving or otherwise unavailable to jot this down. But oh my goodness, Randy, my heart is full. My mind is on fire with all these ideas that you presented today. I just really appreciate our conversation today, and I hope you'll come back and we'll have to do this again.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I love your book and I love all the things that you're doing. And congratulations to you on just so many years now, so many episodes, so many people sponsored, like the ripple effects of what you do, like karmically. Honestly, like people focus on how hurt people hurt others, but healed people heal others. And like the work that you've been doing is like the karmic ripples are tsunami size. So,
oh, yay.
Thank you for your work.
Gold. I feel like I got a gold star. Such an achievement, Chucky. Well, listen, Randy, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed you, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
All right. Thank you. Have a great one.
You too.
One last thing before you go, you can follow the podcast on Instagram for daily inspiration at ODAT Podcast. And if you'd like to get a biweekly email from me with recommendations to books I'm reading, meditations I love, or other recovery podcasts, just sign up for it at odatchat.com. That's ODAAT chat.com. And if you do, I hope you enjoy it.